podcast where we talk to smart people, but not necessarily done by smart people?
That is an awesome question.
This one goes down probably on one of my top 5.
Hey, I like nutrition. I like to eat food.
This is the coolest thing ever. We're going to do this forever.
I wish I paid more attention in that class.
You know, I'm going to be honest, I don't understand that. As a man, I don't get it.
Welcome to smartpeoplepodcast.com.
Welcome to Smart People Podcast, conversations that satisfy your curious mind. Guess who's here today for the intro?
John Rojas is here.
Guess who is here for the interview?
John Rojas was there.
Heyo! It's few and far between these days, but you got to get it while it's hot. This week, we are interviewing Markus Kramer, and Markus is a partner at Brand Affairs, which is an independent agency for public relations and brand strategy. And it's a really cool story about how we kind of came into contact with our guest this week, Markus. They reached out to us on email, said that they listened to the show, a couple of partners at the firm, and wanted to help out. And we've been working with them for, I don't know, months now at this point, right?
Yeah, they're helping us develop our mission and our brand, all that good stuff, because Chris and I
didn't have one.
Well, we just wanted to put good podcasts into the world, and that wasn't quite enough.
That's not enough of a story, but we're working on that, and they're helping us trying to get the word out. And not only that, but Markus is one of the smartest guys. When we were told, yeah, guys, we'll help you kind of pro bono because we like your show, we were like, what? And then we read his bio along with his partners. They're a little too smart for us.
Markus is an architect by training, got some degrees at some really amazing places. He got a degree in international project management from University of California, Berkeley, got an MBA from the University of Oxford. He sits on a lot of boards right now, and he also helped Aston Martin and Harley-Davidson grow their brands. So not a small feat at all.
Yeah, not a bad person to have on our side.
Pretty amazing. I remember looking at his bio for the first time, just being like, wait, he listens to our podcast?
Yeah. So we're going to talk to Markus today about branding, and we're going to get into the idea of luxury and luxury brands, how they create that, what it means to pay $5 million for a watch. Some really interesting stuff that we haven't tackled on the podcast before.
We're going to turn it over to Markus here in a second, but before that, don't forget that you can head over to smartpeoplepodcast.com, see what all's going on in the world of Smart People Podcast. You can sign up for the newsletter, you can rate us on iTunes and Stitcher from the buttons that we have conveniently on the site, all that great stuff. You know, guys, we really do appreciate it when you leave reviews for us on iTunes and Stitcher. It means the world to us. So if you could take 2-3 minutes of your day and go out there, leave us a review and a comment. We truly do appreciate it. And it helps us to continue to get amazing guests for the show. Now on to Markus Kramer.
Well, Markus, thanks so much for joining us on the show today. Excited to talk to you all about what's going on at Brand Affairs and a little bit about your background. So for those that don't know, for the audience members, why don't you give us a little background on what you're up to these days?
Yeah, so we're up to into lots of stuff, basically. But one of the areas that we're really strong on and focusing on is helping, it's actually twofold, helping luxury brands become more professional. Lots of times we've got clients that are actually small, medium enterprises, very often family-owned, very often owners-driven, to help them compete in a global marketplace, particularly if you're into the luxury space. That can be anything from watches to cars to private banking, actually. And then the other thing is the flip side of it. It's really lots of clients that ask us, well, what could we actually learn from this luxury goods industry? It seems to be incredibly successful, but what actually is there? How does it take? Help us understand and help us maybe get some insights in what we could learn from the luxury goods industry. And really, those two are areas where we're strongly engaged in. Let's put it that way, particularly in continental Europe, but increasingly outside as well, Asia notably, and US to some extent as well.
Yeah, and I definitely want to go into this idea of luxury. And in the intro, John and I kind of talk about Brand Affairs in general and even how we all met. So it's a really interesting story. But how about some background on how you got into this space of kind of marketing and a little bit about your specific background?
Yeah, I spent the last probably 15 to 20 years in the brand and marketing retail development space. But really, if you really go all the way back, I'm actually an architect by training. I started off in architecture a long time ago. And at some point, after about 4 years, came to the conclusion, this is great. I love the whole idea of planning, of blueprinting, assembling craftsmen, building something, delivering it. But if you build a house, which is what you do when you're an architect, or maybe it's a commercial building, but it's static. Once you're done, it's there, it's static, it doesn't move. And it wasn't really commercial enough, to be perfectly honest. It wasn't commercial enough, it wasn't dynamic enough. And so I got into very quickly into the commercial world of cars, and spent a long time in cars brand. We were spending time with Mazda, Ford Motor Company, Honda, really the sort of mass space, if you think about the car world. And into marketing, went on, did my bit in the army, did an MBA at University of Oxford over in the UK, spent quite a bit of time in Berkeley, in the US as well. But along that and in between, jumped jobs from, 4 wheels to 2 wheels, and got a really great opportunity to work for nearly 7 years with the Harley-Davidson Motor Company. And if you think about brand and the power of brand, of that almost institutional power a brand like this exudes, you do learn a lot. And I later on was able to take this back into the world of 4 wheels with Aston Martin. A great experience as well. And after 15, probably 18 years, thought, hey, I mean, this great collective experience, why wouldn't you bundle that up? Why wouldn't you take that and take it to more people, more places, more businesses that could probably benefit from all this experience? And this is how I got where I am. And it's this collective experience that I pretty much take to individuals sometimes, but mostly it's SMEs, and some of them are actually quite big brands too.
Well, let's talk about brands in general. And as you mentioned, you work for a long time at Harley-Davidson, who has built just a lifestyle brand, if you will. I mean, they represent, you just hear that name and you think kind of, American, or just tough, gritty, passion, fast, all that. It just comes to mind. And so in your opinion, somebody who's been in the industry for so long, what does it mean to be a brand and to build a brand?
What does it mean to be a brand or to build a brand? And I think this is where we're going to probably later on make the bridge into the world of luxury. I think one of the really fundamental ones is to have a really crystal clear sense of purpose, such a sharp understanding of who you are and why, the very reason why you exist, that it almost transcends and exudes throughout the organization without having to go through you don't really have to teach and preach people who you are and what you do. People just join in the reason for the very reason for existence by the pure passion for who you are and what you are. And Harley is a great example of this. I mean, throughout the motor company, all the way up to the president and CEO, you will have this passion going throughout down to the workers on the line. This is, I think, truly unique. If you find this, and you do find this, particularly in the luxury goods sector too.
So do you think that it's more important to exude your brand internally to your own employees or externally to the consumer?
Both. But it starts, like for us as individuals, it starts within yourself. If you're not able or capable to do this with a huge degree of enthusiasm, but also integrity and a value system you really truly believe in, it's very unlikely the customers are going to notice that. And it comes across as either mechanical or transactional, and both of them don't really do anything for passion.
When I think of branding in general, and I know a lot of people who feel this way, although the average consumer is just inundated with things, sometimes I feel like I'm stronger than that, right? Oh, I might see the commercial, but it doesn't really associate with anything. Or I might see their billboards or their ads or their packaging, but it's not going to entice me to buy. So what would you say to that person who feels like, the branding isn't really what's selling the product or the service?
That's probably true. Because if you think about it, the notion today, if you think about branding, if you think about marketing, this is very quickly associated with big budgets and huge huge marketing communications activities. going anywhere from traditional one-way TV all the way through to digital and interactive, but it's still a means to manipulate you as an individual. And I think this is kind of what comes across as thinking, oh, you can't manipulate me. You know, I'm not really up for that. But if you're really into a territory of purpose where you have such a crystal clear way of addressing a universal truth almost, or a universal human need as a brand, then this becomes almost secondary. And if you look at companies like the Harley-Davidson Motor Company, but if you look at companies like Aston Martin, if you look at companies like supercars, for example, or high-end watch manufacturing, it's not only about the marketing communications efforts in these companies. They're actually almost happening on the side. There's a lot more at play, and people buy into these brands for a lot more than by being convinced by media.
John, I see you nodding your head. What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I look at brands like Apple, and they do a lot of media stuff, but they also do a lot for their customers, making them feel like they're part of this group. They make them feel special on the days that they release new products and that kind of thing. I was just at the Apple store today, and I know my experience there was amazing. I was in and out, got the help that I needed, and I just felt like walking out that door, I was like, man, I love this place. And I like to think of myself as like a smart person too, and not, affected by all of this imagery and branding and all that kind of stuff. But when they create this culture that you want to be part of, I see that aspect of branding too.
Yeah, I think this is a really good example. And if you take any modern brand, any sort of contemporary technology, if you look at Interbrand study, for example, the most valuable brands in the world, there's a number of people that do this with very sophisticated and very clever models. But if you look at the Interbrand, for instance, the 5 most valuable brands, if you go out and Google them up and look at it, 4 out of them are technology brands. And there's only one that isn't a technology brand. It's Coca-Cola, still there and probably will be there for a long time. But the other 4 have emerged relatively recently. And if you look at number 1, it's Apple. So if I go back to, well, what does Apple do really, really well? And then go back to, well, how does the luxury goods industry actually take? I mean, you'd be surprised how many parallels you'd actually find in there. For example, the obsession with product, right? This is something that luxury goods companies do incredibly well. Think of a high-end watch manufacturer somewhere hidden in the Swiss mountains somewhere, a very small company. Over 200 years, they will have honed their mechanical expertise, the tradition, the people, the craftsmen, the dedication, the passion it takes to create a masterpiece in time making. Sometimes for a Grand Tourbillon, it will take a year to create one movement. Think about how you instill that within your company and in your brand. It's total obsession for the product. It's a complete antidote, right? Most marketing and brand guys will say, hey, it's all customer centered. It's all about the consumer. It's all about the customer. But in reality, if you don't go back and say, well, how did Apple actually get where they are? It's total obsession with the product. And I'm not saying they don't love their customers, but they're so incredibly good at what they're doing because they're so focused on delivering the very best in terms of hardware, in terms of software, in terms of user experience. And this is really at the nucleus of the luxury goods industry as well.
I think that's really interesting because oftentimes branding, I think, gets skewed so much in the direction of it's only what the consumer sees. It's only what's kind of pushed upon them, the message that's told to them. But really, it oftentimes, as you mentioned, goes back solely initially to the product or service itself. I mean, you could probably have the best branding strategy in the world for a really terrible product, and it might work for a little bit, but the life expectancy's got to be, tiny. Anything come to mind, or any companies you've ever seen do that, or?
Well, let's just say that probably 9 out of 10 will go down that route, right? They crank something out, especially the large FMCG companies. They'll come up with a great idea. They'll productize it. They'll have all the sophistication in the world thrown at it. And they'll also throw, millions, tens of millions of dollars at it to promote it. 9 out of 10 times, I'd say this is relatively short-lived. And it's really, really unfortunate, I think, because at some point there's good examples in history. Think New Coke, right? You guys probably don't remember that. I barely just remember it, but New Coke is a great example where I think, well, there's these huge conglomerates out there with all their cleverness and sophistication, still stumbling up in relatively simplistic things in life of taking the consumer into the very heart of what they do, really asking the simple questions. Well, what need are we actually addressing? And does it actually fulfill any larger purpose? Does it make my life better as a consumer? And how do we address this? And not think about the communications aspects first. That comes a lot later when you actually have a really great service and a really great product. Again, if you go back to, well, who is doing this really, really well? The luxury goods industry. And I'm really thinking high-end luxury are doing this incredibly well.
Yeah, so let's talk about luxury. I mean, first, when you mention luxury, what defines a luxury brand versus perhaps just another brand that happens to be mildly expensive?
Right. Okay. So yeah, I do claim that we can collectively as individuals and as companies in particular, whether you're B2C or B2B, doesn't actually matter. You can learn from this industry. So, but if we think about learning from this industry, we really have to ask ourselves, first, starting off, what actually is it? What defines it? But let me flip the question around. What's luxury to you? Is it a supercar? Is it the Bugatti Veyron for $2 million with 1,000 horsepower? Is that luxury, or is it a Fairline Squadron 78? A super yacht, maybe 2, 3, 4 million? Is it a Hublot 5 million? So we have over here we have the world's largest watch fair every year in March called the Basel World, and Hublot is a great brand, and they've presented a watch called the Hublot 5 million. The Hublot 5 million, as the name says, this is territory of watchmaking where you're into sort of $5 million space. And if you think about it, it's 1,200 diamonds on this watch. If I could show you a picture of this, I mean, it'd blow you out of your socks. It's incredible.
When you say 5 million, you mean the watch costs $5 million?
The watch costs $5 million. Right. So, and of course, you go really into the super high-end luxury space with this. Who buys this? And we can talk about this a little bit later on, but from there you move on. Well, maybe luxury to you is a private jet. It's either flying in a private jet, maybe it's buying a private jet. If you go all the way up to having your own Boeing business jet, you're talking hundreds of millions. Maybe luxury is diamonds for you. Maybe it's a diamond for you or for your girlfriend or for your wife, or maybe luxury is walking into a Louis Vuitton store, buying a beautiful bag. But if you spin that further, right? So these are the traditional cliches of what we think when we talk about luxury. This is sort of the emotions it evokes, the imagery, the visuals you think of if you speak or talk about luxury, sort of the inaccessible. But maybe luxury is an experience. Maybe luxury is travel. Or maybe luxury is actually even more inwardly focused. Maybe it's a spa treatment. No one else sees it. No one else knows about it. It's just your very own time. And I think, I'm not sure if you guys know it, but Coco Chanel number 5. Chanel number 5, very famous perfume, basically. But she said, some people think luxury is the opposite of poverty. It is not. It's the opposite of vulgarity. And, just think about it, right? People think luxury is the opposite of poverty. It is not. It's the opposite of vulgarity. She said that 50 years ago. And I think she was spot on, because what she really means is that luxury is really beyond materialism. Luxury is really something that happens in yourself and really has to do with sophistication and taste. Unfortunately, with some of the earlier examples, right, you can very quickly jump to the conclusion luxury is only about showing off, right? Luxury is only about demonstration of status. And if we take that and then say, well, okay, so if we understand a little bit of what maybe this luxury is, well, how big is it? It's huge business if you think about it. The luxury goods business is roughly estimated by BCG, Boston Consulting Group. So don't claim IP over this figure, but it was estimated in 2010 at about $1.2 trillion, the luxury industry. So this is really, really big. This is not just, one Hublot 5 million. This is lots, hundreds of thousands of very expensive luxury goods, mainly in the fashion and clothing, in the watch and jewelry business, leather goods, accessories, cosmetics, but also travel and hotels, and of course all the way up to luxury supercars. But if I were to tell you now that actually, I've said this is 2010, I'm not sure if you noted that, but if you were to look at this composition again today, it's doubled, right? It's nearly $2.5 trillion US. Think about it. Didn't we just have a huge financial crisis? Didn't Lehman Brothers collapse in 2008? Didn't the world at large just go into a huge economic sort of, dark black hole and hopefully is emerging out of it? But here we have an industry that has doubled in the same time that the rest of most industries actually had a really difficult time. How do you explain that? I mean, how do you explain such a tremendous success? And if you were to compare this, say, for example, to S&P, you can take the S&P Global Luxury Index and compare it. You can do this. You can Google it and you can compare it to just generally how did the luxury goods sector perform over the last 5 to 6 years. And what you would see is not only this, actually the thing did double, right? This industry is tremendously successful. You'd also see that it really didn't have such a massive hit in the last recession, and it recovered a lot quicker and a lot swifter. Why do you think that is? There are some fundamental questions where I think this whole idea of learning from the luxury industry has some really solid grounding. This isn't just made up stuff. There is actually a real dynamics in this market that are happening that a lot of businesses could do really well to take a closer look at.
All right, Chris, I have to ask. I kind of blasted you during the last spot, calling you a late or last adopter.
Yeah, I heard that. Mm-hmm.
But I want to know what you think about smart things now.
Well, I'm going to be honest. My initial question was, hey, why do I need to, use my phone to turn on a light or monitor everything in my home? But when I went on the website and checked some things out, I realized I was really late to the party.
Yeah, because it's so much more than turning on the light. I know we've talked about you're buying a new home. You have so many more things to worry about. And one of those things that we never even thought about was leaks in a house, right?
Yep.
And
yeah, my dad had a leak in his basement. It cost him, I think, $5,000 to replace the floors. And instead, for like $100, you can use smart things and it'll tell you. So peace of mind, no matter where you are.
I'm glad you're finally a convert now.
Well, and also, you ever leave the house and go, I wonder if I lock that door, if I close that door, if I turn this off? I've done that, and I have to go back, drive back in the house and check that out. You can do that right from your phone when you leave. It took me the cool video on the website, so I would recommend everyone just go check it out. Go to smartthings.com/smartpeople. Make sure you go to /smartpeople because you get 10% off and lets them know that you're supporting the show. And check out the video on there.
With no required monthly fees and kits starting at just $189, Smart Things is affordable for everyone. Get 10% off any home security or solution kits when you go to smartthings.com/smartpeople. And now back to the show.
Well, and I definitely want to get into that, but on the subject of kind of how the luxury brands have thrived, my initial thought is it's probably because, a lot of it's due to the disparity of wealth across the globe. I mean, I think that, these dips in the market affect the middle and lower class a lot more than those that had 50 billion and now they have 30 billion, but they still have more money than they could buy in jets and $5 million watches.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, you're right. If you take it down to, there's clearly a number of factors playing into this, but if you look at the hard facts, for example, you could simply take growth of world wealth, for example, as expressed in, within the jargon, we would call them high net worth individuals, HNW, or even ultra high net worth individuals. But say high net worth individuals are basically people, they own roughly $1 million. Net disposable cash to spend right now. So this doesn't count your residence or your property. This is $1 million to spend. If you were to look around the globe on how many of these people are out there, in 1996 there were probably about 5-6 million of these. Then if you look again 2010, let's just go back to 4 years ago, there were roughly about 10 million people, so it's doubled, but it took quite a bit of time. But in 4 years, we're now 16, 17 million, and by 2020, we'll be at 20 million millionaires around the world. So clearly, you're right? It's income disparities. So there's more people that just have a lot of money. If you then take another factor, well, where is this wealth created? Where is this wealth? Old money and old wealth still is very predominantly in the Western world, the US, continental Europe, etc. But if you look at the acceleration and growth, you have China. Look at Asia and look at where some of this money is coming from and where some of these luxury goods really are sold as well. I'm not saying they're necessarily sold in China, but it's sold a lot to Chinese consumers traveling around the world. And so you do have a lot more people with a lot higher disposable incomes, particularly with the rising middle class in the BRIC markets, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, that explain some of this tremendous growth, despite really in our world some economic uncertainty. But there's a third factor that I think is really crucial as well, and that's brand. It's the intangibles really inherent in those brands. If you think about instability, if you think about economic worries and so forth, right, then to buy something that has timeless value almost, that is really an anchor in stability that you can truly believe in, that will not only satisfy your own desire of owning a luxury product, but possibly and very likely retain its value or perhaps even increase its value over time. Then luxury goods have a lot of intangibles, the stories behind the imagery that we just discussed, that it evokes, are things you can't really touch but have tremendous value. And particularly when things are a bit difficult, consumers will very quickly orient themselves to brands or labels that truly stand for something, that truly have integrity in their value chains, for example, and are ready to pay a big premium way beyond and above the value of the actual product.
That's really interesting because I was hoping, I know we were going in this direction, but what are the things that we can learn from these luxury brands? Because they get to a place where the margins become astronomical, and it's, as you mentioned, because they're selling the story, the emotion. I think that's one of the biggest things is you're selling the feeling of purchasing it, owning it, whether that be feeling like you're important or your ego or comfort or whatever it might be. How do they do that?
Yeah, okay. Let's I think before we jump to how do they do that? What can we really take from it? What you've just mentioned is actually super fundamental to understand for anyone who wants to really, have a more than just a superficial understanding of what luxury is. This ego, this emotion, yes, the emotion is very much a state of, it's a state of happiness generally, if you think about positive emotions and what possibly luxury brands can do to help you achieve this. But if you go a step back and you mentioned ego, I think this is really important. Let's just take maybe a minute or two to explore that a little bit more because it's so fundamental. Think about Louis XIV, right? Louis XIV, one of the greatest French rulers on earth, probably one of the most powerful monarchs having walked this earth. So here we are in the 16th, 17th century medieval France. Imagine the beautiful pompous castles in the outskirts of Paris and Versailles, etc. And here you have a ruler. If you picture him, if I were able to show you a picture, you would see a guy that you would just think, okay, the guy is a really 16th, 17th century monarch. He's wearing high heels, right? He's wearing high heels, and he wears a huge, massive robe. So picture this, right? All this pomp. Why do you think a guy like this would have worn high heels, right? Why is that? So clearly he wasn't a very tall guy. He was actually relatively short, but even so he complemented his bodily height by wearing high heels. But even if he were super tall, he would still have worn high heels in those days. So this is a slight hint into what really makes luxury different, or how it really defines luxury. And so is the robe. Actually, the robe was so massive, he couldn't even walk on his own. Certainly not in high heels. He had to have people helping him going from A to B. So what does that question, or what does this description have to do with luxury, if you think about it? And I'll bounce the question back, guys. Anything spring to mind what that could have to do with luxury? A guy wearing high heels in the 16th, 17th century, not being able to move from one place to the other, but clearly he's the biggest guy in town. What could that have to do with luxury?
John, what you got?
I mean, I just think like he wants to be the
biggest,
prettiest. Yeah, he wants to be the man and be looked at as the man.
Yeah, it's very much around that notion. It's basically a demonstration of power. And this was really a demonstration of social power. So, side note, right, high heels were actually invented by men. They were worn by men for many hundred years. And it's only relatively recently that we see women wearing high heels. Wait, can you imagine walking in high heels as a man, right? I'm not sure if you've ever tried it. I certainly haven't tried, but give it a go or ask any lady, But this is relatively recent that the women wear high heels, and it really has to do with empowerment. And John, you really mentioned it. This is about power. This is about power. It's such a simple thing, and it really has to do with observation that people wouldn't normally notice. They wouldn't think to associate anything or any origins or any roots back to that. Luxury as a concept goes back, a lot longer than this, but I think this is a good example because Louis XIV was clearly there to exude power, social power, might over his people. And you're right, to demonstrate that you would do anything basically, even if it meant that you couldn't even move yourself from A to B. But what it also means is that luxury is a very transitional concept. So we didn't get, we're not stuck anymore in the Middle Ages and Louis XIV. But from the demonstration of power or social power, particularly over the last sort of 150 years with Industrial Revolution and sort of the consumer products or the mass products being more accessible to more people, humanity and the elite society had to find new ways to demonstrate status, to differentiate themselves. And this was expressed and still is in a lot of markets through materialistic expressions, such as, the shiny red fast car, let's say, for example, or a Hublot 5 million with 1,200 diamonds on it. That is quite a powerful demonstration of wealth. So we've seen the transitional concept of luxury developing from demonstration of power as in social power to demonstration of wealth. And how do you show that? Through status symbols. And that's gone for the last probably 50 to 60 years. And if you were to look around the world on a map, some markets, particularly the BRIC markets, will still tick very much on this notion of differentiation and demonstration of status. However, a lot of markets, particularly sort of the Western European markets, but I would include the US there as well, have gone beyond that and said, well, goes back to the very earlier point that I mentioned from Coco Chanel and what she defines as luxury, which she actually had in mind 50 years ago, is, well, maybe this is much more about sophistication. Maybe this is much more about taste. And maybe I don't have to show off so much, but I can actually enjoy this for myself. And at the very core of it is still this transitional concept of status of demonstration of power as in social power through demonstration of social status as in wealth and demonstration of wealth, going into demonstration of sophistication and taste as in the more advanced societies and the more sort of discerning consumers around this world that get to this position where it's no longer needed to show off, where it's no longer needed to drink or have my bottle of wine positioned on the table as such, so you can see the label of it. And it's interesting that emerging markets, in particular China, is actually very quickly coming onto that territory. It won't take them 30 or 40 years like some of the Western societies took. It will go a lot faster, and some of the luxury brands start to feel this probably already, I would imagine. If I were a high-end watch manufacturer, I would ask myself the question, supercars as well, ask myself the question, how quickly is that curve evolving? We're not talking a generation, we're talking 5-10 years.
If I was an eccentric like millionaire or billionaire and I wanted to have the best cars, the best watches, that type of thing, I would look towards these luxury brands. But unfortunately, I'm not in that market. So the market that I am in, these companies that are going after middle class and everyday people within the world, what have they learned from the luxury brands? And who are some of these companies that have picked up on, the principles that these luxury brands do, how they're able to convey this type of emotion and get people to, be very loyal to their brand?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. The world I describe, particularly with this very high-end universe, is inaccessible to most, right? Simple fact of life and a very deliberate fact of life as well. A very deliberate fact to really focus on this aspirational dream world. This is where you generate the exclusivity and a very deliberate way of communicating this exclusive world, this dream, towards sort of the masses, let's say. And there's a deliberate way of creating distance. There's a deliberate way of creating, I would call it almost social distance. And you do this through limited products, limited editions. You do it through distribution, and you can't access it everywhere. You have to find a particular luxury shop, and price, of course. And price is the one that people jump instantly to. Well, it's inaccessible. We'll never be able to afford it, but I'd love to have one. So this is the mechanics. But if to your question, so you mentioned Apple. I think earlier on, and I think it's a very good example to unpack some of these mechanics. So, say for example, the principle of scarcity, right? To create a deliberate scarcity around your product. So we talked about the really strong focus on, and the passion, the almost unique focus on creating a great product first, and then about the customer. Something that's Apple done really well. We've touched on this. But if you were to take scarcity as a principle on how luxury works, well, and you go back to Apple, well, distribution, right? It's actually, if you want to go to an Apple store, you have to, it's unlikely just around your corner. You actually have to either be in a place or deliberately go there. If you look scarcity in terms of promotional effectiveness, well, the queues of people queuing up for the latest iPhone 6 in front of the Apple stores and so forth. Well, do you honestly think this is left to chance and this is just purely by coincidence? There's a lot of deliberance in creating this. And what does it fuel? It fuels exclusivity, it fuels aspiration, and it ultimately allows you to extract more value for your product or for your brand. So there are things that you can play with very, very deliberately, but it's a very balancing and a very careful act. But an Apple iPhone, let's say, if we stick with an iPad or an iPhone, it's very accessible. It's very accessible. So one of the things that is happening, and I would call this democratization of luxury. This is typically in the US. This is a good example as well. If we think about car brands, think about Lexus, think about Infiniti, and whether you would consider those brands as luxury brands or not. They are primarily technology brands, and they're really good brands. They're really good cars. But how would they compare on this? Or Tesla as a car manufacturer, would you consider Tesla a luxury brand? Well, think about price. Okay, it's I would actually think this is reasonably accessible. I wouldn't compare this with a Hublot 5 million, for example, but it's probably in the premium space. But distribution, very cleverly, right? I mean, not every, if you really want to go to a Tesla car dealership, it's very likely Tesla owns it. I'm not 100% sure, but I think they actually own all of their stores. The people in their stores, right? The equipment in their stores, the locations. So they control the vertical value chain almost entirely. Maybe not the supply chain, but the vertical chain that takes the car to you, they own it. And it gives them great, like Apple, it gives them fantastic ability to control the customer experience. A lot of struggle with this omni-channel experience. And how do we all integrate it? How do we make it happen? Take Hermès, take Louis Vuitton. They own their channel. They control. The people employed in a Louis Vuitton store are Louis Vuitton people. In an Hermès store, there are Hermès people. They're not hired by some third party that has different interests, where you're just a product on the shelf. It's true for Apple. It's true for Tesla as well. So that's very inherent in the luxury goods industry. So they take these principles very deliberately, and they make them, make great use of those principles for their brands and for their products.
What's the difference between your retirement plan and a smart retirement plan? A smart plan lets you retire sooner with the same contributions. Part of it comes down to strategic investments and optimizations of your portfolio. The other part is reducing those high fees that you're paying.
And with our sponsor this week, Future Advisor, you get both. And that combination could shave years off your retirement and put you on the golf course sooner. Just plug in your investments, and Future Advisor will give you an honest grade on your current portfolio's performance, diversification, taxes, everything. So John and I went over and put our stuff in there and got our grades. And unfortunately,
they were not awesome.
Yeah. Although I'm a finance major, I got 2 Fs and 2 A+. What about you, John?
I'll just say I did a little worse. Luckily for me, Future Advisor will show you how you're doing and how to improve for free. Either make the changes yourself, or if you'd like, Future Advisor will manage your portfolio for a fraction of what a traditional advisor would charge.
Thinking about retirement's difficult. Oftentimes it's a long ways in the distance and you can't quite see it clearly. But when you use Future Advisor, you get a clear picture of where you stand and what you need to do to retire on time. Right now, Future Advisor is offering listeners to Smart People Podcast 3 months of the premium investment management for free. Go to futureadvisor.com/smartpeople.
Let new technology give you complete clarity on all of your investments and a plan to meet your goals sooner. As Chris mentioned, go to futureadvisor.com/smartpeople for your 3-month free premium portfolio management. And now back to the show.
Now, I wanted to get a sense of, at Brand Affairs, you work with a number of brands ranging, I'm assuming, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but from luxury to things that wouldn't necessarily be considered luxury, right?
That's very true.
So when they come to you, I'd say these non-luxury brands, what's kind of the process that you walk them through? And what would you recommend for people who are even maybe entrepreneurs, solopreneurs? Here's what you need to do to start building your brand. And if you have one, here's how you kind of up your game. Right.
Yeah. Okay. So here's the hands-on stuff. What would you really do? What do you really do with all these insights? Firstly, there's probably 5 or 6 that I'll walk you through, and I think anyone can do them for themselves. But the first one and the most important one is, again, be crystal clear on purpose. And let me maybe spend a minute on what I mean by that, because there's plenty of people talking about purpose and what's the difference towards a vision or a mission, etc. But purpose, this is really who you are, what you stand for. It is really it's actually a surprisingly difficult stage to reach with either individuals or companies. And the bigger the companies are, the more difficult this is to reach. But I call this, it's really, I would call this shared and aligned purpose. So do this for yourself, right? Ask yourself, what do we really stand for, right? And can you answer this question to me in 5 words or less? Just do this mental exercise. Who are you? What do you stand for? Really fundamentally, 5 words or less. And then you go sort of in your mind, or you can actually do this as an exercise in your company, and you go to your staff and you ask the same question. What do we really stand for? I give you 5 words. Tell me what we stand for. And you look at this and you check this, and if it's not spot on, but it's from a meaning point of view, the same thing, really you can tie it down and say, this is the same thing. Then I would call this shared purpose. If you then go outside and you ask, your suppliers, your partners, ask your customers the same question, and you go, what do we really stand for? If you get, again, the same answer within that very tight sort of 5 words, then you have aligned purpose. If you have shared and aligned purpose, you're in a really good position. But if you don't have that, equally, go back and do the thinking. There are great frameworks, the 8 Ps of luxury, for example. Again, going back to the luxury industry, there are other frameworks to help you define that, get to that point. This is not a vision, this is not a mission, this is not an objective. It's the universal need you address. And then from there, you go and say, okay, so let's assume you have that, you're crystal clear on who you are and what you stand for. Then you go and say, well, it's very likely you're not alone. Very, very likely you're not the only one with the same purpose out there, particularly if you're in the commercial space. Where do you differentiate? How do you differentiate? What is your real territory of differentiation? And again, if I'll give you an example. For example, for Aston Martin, I've spent a long time working with the guys. They're a fantastic brand. But where do you differentiate? They're clearly not the fastest cars in the supercar world. They're not necessarily from a technology point of view. You could look at Germanic cars. You could look at all kind of. You really differentiate in technology. If you're really honest, no, it doesn't. And not everybody's James Bond either driving one. But where do you differentiate? Well, I would claim, and I would still claim that, and I hope the guys still claim that, it's just the most beautiful car in the world. It's a very simple, bold statement, and it's very translatable. You can really take that and translate that into China, right? If you have a customer claim that is too complicated, too complex, and works in the, let's say, the Western world, power, beauty, soul, for Aston Martin. It's a very difficult concept to translate into China. And if you hold this against, Ferrari, Formula One, great, this is just really super fast cars. And you hold it against, let's say, Porsche, oh, well, it's technology. And you have one word to describe it. At Aston, we got to the point where we said, well, it's beauty. Let's just put a stake in the ground and differentiate about the territory of beauty, the most beautiful car in the world. You wouldn't say that necessarily to the outside world, but what you would do is the third point. You act on it with total integrity. You really do everything you can to underpin that territory of differentiation. So again, going back to the car world, if it looks like leather and you claim it's leather, it is real leather and it's sourced from a organically, from a corporate point of view, ethically sourced provenance. If it's hand stitched or it looks like hand stitching, live with the imperfections, but it is a human being behind it that actually does it. And integrity is not just tied to material, it's also tied to people, your leadership skills, how you treat people, how you compensate people, the pride you instill within people, for example. So you do everything you can do to build a value proposition that is really thoroughly done with integrity around your territory of differentiation. The fourth point would be and that's way undervalued, particularly in startups, particularly in B2B, particularly in the services industry. This is completely undervalued, and we could do so much more with it. Make it beautiful. Make things beautiful. Nature is incredibly strong at it, right? You look at the flower, look at the rose. I mean, how does nature do this? It's just simply beautiful, and it doesn't, it looks so easy for nature to do this. And we as humans, we think system, we think process, we think infrastructure, we think maximizing profits for our own sake. We think, large call center operations, when really the individual wants to hear a human voice that sounds like your next door buddy. Zappos does a great job at this, for example. Make it beautiful. So this is an example of a customer interaction, but it could go a lot further. It doesn't just have to be a supercar that was painted, for 50 hours. And of course, without you even noticing this looks beautiful, there's deliberance in it. And, creating beautiful things or simple things is actually really, as I'm sure Apple would support this, it's really complex. It's really difficult to get to the point where you do have a product that is absolutely stunning and is beautiful and it works beautifully. But make it beautiful every service, every interaction, every customer interaction, every invoice you print, any email you send, make it beautiful, not just efficient. And then look beyond the money. This is a difficult one for people to understand. And you asked the question, if I'm not in the luxury space or if I'm an entrepreneur or I'm an aspiring one, well, this is a really difficult one to understand. Look beyond the money. What does that mean? But it goes back to your purpose. How do you address a fundamental human need by not just going down the route of making it super efficient, making it super slick, making it churn more profit for you? Because it's very likely that people at some point, yes, they justify always with rationality. Everyone does. Even if you buy the Hublot 5 million, you will make sure you really feel like this is going to retain its value and it's not just, going to be sold for half the price on eBay in 5 years. You wouldn't do that even if you had all the money in the world. Look beyond the money really means of what can you do within your business, within your brand, to really give people a reason to believe that goes beyond the money they put onto the table. Harley-Davidson is a fantastic example for this. I mean, this is almost, I won't use the word here, but it goes, if you look at how many people put a tattoo on their bodies with the brand still today embodied in it, so much more you believe in than the material, in the product, or the value of money that you can associate with it. What can you do for yourself where people say, hey, there's much more at stake, there's much more I'm buying into than just the monetary value. And then the last one is probably that I could mention, and then I'll wrap it up here, but how does it make your customer feel? Most companies are great at measuring customer satisfaction indexes or NPS, Net Promoter Score, is another great way that really gives you a bit of a steer on how people felt the minute they transacted with you, but not much more beyond. There are a few alternative models, but how many smiles do you put on people's faces? right? If you're really honest. And how can you measure it? And it also means how close can or do you want to be with your customer? So those are 5 or 4, I'm not quite sure how many I gave you, but maybe 5, 6 core principles I think are totally transportable, transferable. But they need you to take a step back. They need you to rethink what you actually do. They need you to rethink or really deliberately rethink and spend time with either yourself or as an entrepreneurial business or even a larger corporation. Some of the companies I work with are, huge. And for them, it's even more difficult if you're once there and you've been around for 30, 40, 50 years to re-question some of these basics, some of these fundamentals is really hard work. This is kind of what we do. We help with relatively simple language and simple frameworks to articulate this.
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic. And I think it's something that a lot of people oftentimes, or small business owners, or sometimes maybe large business owners, but doubtful, don't spend enough time on. And they understand that they need to build it, but really sitting down and drawing it out and discovering your purpose, your mission, what you truly believe, I think is core. So I really appreciate that message and the, kind of the tips you gave us to translate those into our own lives. But so for those that, want to learn more about Brand Affairs and what you do, where can we find out, a little bit more about you and that company?
Well, Brand Affairs, you can simply go and check us out. We're small. We're really boutique. There's only about 15 of us, and mainly between Zurich and London. Primarily, although I'm over in the US end of November as well. But so we're really small. Brandaffairs.com. Just check us out on brandaffairs.com. If you want to check out more what I do, specifically the thinking in the luxury space, you can check that out on my website, markuskramer.net. And you can look at latest thinking and on the blog where I unpack some of these luxury thinking. And you can very, very happily connect with me on LinkedIn or any other social network.
Yeah, that's great. And we'll definitely go ahead and link to that right on the post at smartpeoplepodcast.com. Markus, really wanted to say thanks for being on the show. It's been a blast. I know it's been a long time in the making, but happy to finally make it happen.
Yeah, hey, pleasure's on my side, and really pleasure talking to you guys. And if anyone out there can apply some of these luxury principles and make life for themselves and anyone else around them better, then great.
Welcome back. I hope you guys enjoyed that conversation with Markus. If you did enjoy it, please head over to iTunes and Stitcher, leave a rating and review there. And if you had anything that you wanted to talk to us about, you can email us at smartpeoplepodcast@gmail.com or shoot us a message on Twitter at smartpeoplepod.
I actually don't have anything, so I'm good, guys. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening, guys. We'll see you next week.